Welcome to the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast. My name is Brandon Joffe. My hope with this podcast is that I can touch on relationship and mental health issues in a way that is more helpful than some of the resources out there, and that we can weed out some of the unhelpful trends in the industry of mental health and figure out what really works in fixing our relationships and the stuff that doesn't feel so good going on in our heads. The Inspired Resolution Center is dedicated to helping families with teens, so I'm going to talk a lot about teen mental health, parenting, and of course, the different family relationships that go on in families with teens. All right, well, Zack, I'm excited for you to join me today. And you had brought up a topic that I often talk about with parents in the parent group. We started talking about that, the idea of values, right? And parents pushing their values onto their children, which on the face of it seems right. We're raising our children. We have certain morals and values that we want our kids to not only learn, but kind of abide by and take on as their own. And we believe that that's one of the elements that's going to be necessary for success in their life. This conversation with parents always goes, I think, differently than where they think it's going to go. But before we get into that, Zack, you have been working for me, I think, 8-9 months, somewhere around there.
Coming up on a year in March.
A year in March. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Time flies.
It does. And I love what you've been doing in terms of building your niche. But real quick, do you want to share where you're coming from as a therapist, even though it doesn't totally play into the subject today, but I think it's important that people know who you are and where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for having me on here. I'm very excited for this conversation today. So yeah, my name is Zack. I'm an associate marriage and family therapist. I work at Inspired Resolutions. I have an Instagram called The Paralyzed Therapist. Mm-hmm. And that is because I'm actually in a wheelchair. I was paralyzed in a diving accident when I was 15 years old. That left me wheelchair bound and kind of had to re-navigate my life. And it led me down this amazing path to becoming a therapist and wanting to just give back and help others. Mm-hmm. Something that I don't think I would have ever ended up doing had my injury not happened. So I'm very grateful to be where I am because I could have never expected to be here, and there's nowhere else I'd want to be. I love what I do, and I love continuing to grow and learn and be a better version of myself.
You recently, in addition to being the paralyzed therapist, which I think is profound because we've got a bunch of people out there who have experienced physical trauma and they don't know where to go. Mm-hmm. But you also recently have come up with a new kind of part of your niche. You took on a new role in your life, right?
Yeah. So I got married last year and became a stepdad. So I am a stepdad to an amazing 7-year-old daughter. And I'm really excited because I am kickstarting a free support group for the community where I will be focusing on stepdads and just trying to help, navigate those waters and create a group where we can come together to support each other. And I'm really excited about that.
Right. I love it. Being a stepdad is a big role. I think it's a role that is more, it's got more nuances and it's not the same for everybody because not every kid has the same personality. Not every biological parent with a step parent in their life wants the same thing. And so navigating that is not an easy role to take on. And I'm excited to see as this role unfolds for you, just kind of what you get out of it. And I appreciate your just openness and your willingness to be a part of the community because I know there's a big need for that out there. So today when we talk about morals and values, it's kind of interesting, right? Because as a step parent, you're coming in with certain morals and values and it's not an easy place to be because it's not your biological child, and parents struggle, whether it's their first marriage and, they're raising children, their own biological children together, or it's a stepdad, stepmom situation. The conversation about values, I don't think we have that conversation enough, and I don't think people are intentional about values. A lot of people put morals and values as being the same thing. And I don't think they are the same thing. Morals can lead to some values in your life, but morals are about what's right and wrong. They're a little more definitive. And values, we all have different values, right? Based on our culture, based on our experience, based on it becomes an issue of what's important, right? Sometimes things that we value, we're putting more time, effort, and energy into. Sometimes it's concepts that we want our children to grow up with. The idea of values is hard for adults to navigate with each other. And then you try to navigate that with a child, and it becomes a whole nother ball game. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I really relate to that. Just being a stepdad and trying to teach my stepdaughter values that I know are important and good to learn. And, I have her best interests at heart. But as, a 7-year-old child, they're not understanding where I'm trying to come from. And so often it can be hard to try to, teach certain values to, not only a stepchild, but to anyone, your own child or, your sibling. And if they aren't viewing it the same way you are, there can often be, a little bit of conflict or some friction along that.
And I think it's interesting because what you said was, I know values I know are good. And I think that's where parents get caught up. There are some obvious kind of values, again, that come from morals that I think we know this is right. This is what leads to success. But we create our values based on experience, based on what we were taught growing up, based on the society around us, the family culture that we're in, right? And so there's all these reasons that we create these different values. And one that comes up all the time is a clean house, right? If I go to the average person, I say, you must value, a good value to maintain is having a clean house. People will go, yeah, of course, right? And that is one of those topics that comes into the therapist's office time and time again. And you wouldn't think that it would, but it does. And so the value being having a tidy, clean house is important. Well, not every culture functions that way, right? Not every household functions. And I'm not going to say that it's creating morally incorrect people just because they don't keep their house tidy or maybe as clean as I would want my house. And so kids definitely are not seeing the value of things being tidy and clean, right? They might even value a mess because it's, what they want is more readily available. But it's interesting because that argument gets brought in, though, by adults, right? One person knows that they're right. The house has to be tidy. The dishes have to be done at a certain time. And sometimes another parent's going, you know what? This is causing so much argument in our house, and it's such a pain to do that this is low on the totem pole. I don't want to put a high value on this. I want to put a low value on this. And their argument is often, I want to connect after dinner, or I want to relax, right? And what they're teaching sometimes is a different value than maybe what they're voicing or what the average person in society would say is right. Does that make sense, Zach?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And it made me think about, knowing we're doing this podcast, I was kind of thinking about back to when I was a child and kind of morals and values my parents would put on me. And I was so resistant because I did not care and I did not want it. And, one of the big things for me that's I know it's also come up is chores. Mm-hmm. I hated doing chores when I was a kid, but it was something that I had to do every Saturday. But now looking back, those are things that I'm glad I was taught and was pushed on me. Sure. Back then, I did not.
Sure. There are some households who value chores to such a great degree that half the weekend, if not the whole weekend, is spent doing chores and doing the yard and cleaning the cars, right? And everything is done. And then you have some families who don't value that. They value maybe spending the money on getting those things done so that they can connect and do some of the fun things that they want to do on the weekend. And again, I would say that neither one is right or wrong. It becomes, though, the problem becomes, how do we communicate as parents? What are our expectations, and how are we dealing with the conflict? How are we dealing with the pushback? Because the children are not going to have the same values as you, even though you're teaching them your value system, right? They don't have your
Right.
experience. They don't have the context to put it in. For instance, as a child, you're going, what is the point of doing chores every Saturday if I got to do it next Saturday again? Can't we just wait a week and maybe do it every other Saturday and then I can go have fun? Do you
Yeah.
know what's getting in the way? You know, how this chore thing's getting in the way of me having friends and of me doing things that really matter, right? And that's their point of view. As an adult, I can say, well, it's not the chores necessarily, but I value having a tidy house. I value cleanliness because of health, because of organization, because my mental health is better when things are organized and clean and looking nice. And I could go on and on and on as to why I want my house tidy and clean. But that's not the same for everybody. And for a child, they're not coming from a place of, oh, that makes sense when they give you the pushback. They're coming from a place of, you are crazy. You're not making any sense. This value that you're pushing onto me is not just a burden, but it's incorrect.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And that drives parents nuts.
Yeah. You're making me do something I don't want to do.
Yeah. For no good reason.
Hmm.
What's the payoff?
Right.
Why do I have to clean my room? It's just going to get messy again. And right now I know where everything is. If I want to get my electronic thing that I want, I know exactly where it is in the mess. Put it away.
Hmm.
Right. And so the parent's view is coming from a lot more experience. It's coming from a different time period too. I think a lot of parents have created these values in their life based on their growing up. And sometimes the world changes, not sometimes. The world always changes. Every generation's values are going to change. And it's funny, right? Because when we look back, every generation looking at the new generation goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe that and it's their music, it's their electronic watching, it's the way they interact with people. It's everything, right? And so what we're watching is new values in our children developing that aren't totally in line with ours because they're living in a different generation. And sometimes I don't think parents acknowledge that. And if they were willing to acknowledge that and be a little more diligent in putting themselves in their children's shoes, then maybe they could have more productive conversations instead of that conflict.
And I'll speak from personal experience with, some of my parents had certain values and beliefs that it was like, no ifs, ands, or buts. This is how it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being able now to kind of look back and if they were maybe able to just explain it better to me or try to understand where I was coming from, maybe that would have helped me to understand or, listen to what they, were trying to get me to do.
And if it didn't result in you listening in that moment, I bet it would have at least reduced the resentment and the friction, right? I tell parents often, the goal is not to eliminate the conflict. The goal is to reduce the consequences of the conflict. And if you have a quick conflict where everybody kind of is okay at the end of it, I hate the phrase, but let bygones be bygones type of thing, then we're building and we're planting seeds. But when things turn into an all-out war and there's resentments on both sides, we're breaking down and tearing the relationship. And so it is the parents' responsibility to find that balance in, hey, I'm going to have a boundary, right? This is how it's going to be in my house. I'm not just going to not create boundaries that are in line with my values. However, I'm also willing to have a conversation with you that's reasonable, as long as you're being respectful as I'm talking to you about this. And if you don't agree, here's how I'm going to handle your disagreeing with me. I think parents that we work with a lot of times, they don't realize that it is more that, hey, look, I know the answer. I'm right. Therefore, do what I'm telling you to do. I get it. But do you think it works? It's clearly, if you're bringing it up, it didn't work for you, right?
Yeah. It's hard. And you've also talked about how children's brains aren't fully developed yet. So what a parent is trying to explain to them or get them to understand, they may not even be able to get to that point. And you've talked about brain development. And so I think that's also a major role in this whole conversation.
Yeah. If they're going through a certain major developmental stage, and you're trying to get them to buy into a value that goes against that developmental stage. That's a hard battle to win. I'm not saying give up and just give in, but maybe be more understanding about the pushback so that, again, you can be influential because of how you handle it. That makes me kind of think of the I'm insisting that you agree with me attitude. A lot of times is counterproductive. But look, I'm not changing this boundary. I love you. I see where you're coming from. I'm still not going to change this boundary. I get your reaction. I'm still going to maintain my boundary. By the way, I love you. I think that attitude and that kind of type of interaction, again, plants seeds. And even if in the moment they're frustrated, it's not going to create that, oh, I'm definitely going against this, right? You're insisting, you're not explaining, you're not even listening to me. Therefore, I am just going to completely go against what you say, you know? And that brings me to another point. Children, whether parents like it or not, have a front row seat into seeing where the parents are hypocritical. And that whole do as I say, not as I do thing because I'm an adult, it doesn't fly for anybody, right? It doesn't fly. It doesn't fly when you're a boss. It doesn't fly when you're a parent. And so, look, as parents, I am going to be able to do things that my child can't do, right? And I might let them know, hey, here's what's going on. It is an age thing and it is a role thing, right? But I need to be able to talk through that in a way that's not hostile. But for the most part, our values, right? And those are one-offs. There's only a few of those. Mm-hmm. For the most part, I need to be consistent in how I'm living my life, what I'm expecting from my children, and what I'm teaching them. Mm-hmm. And I think we see a lot of parents struggling to do that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was thinking the same thing. Communication and consistency. You know, if you're trying to teach a child to keep their room clean, but you know, as a parent, your room's a disaster.
Yeah,
it's going to be a lot more challenging if your child's looking at your room and like, well, why is your room going to be messy and you're forcing me to clean mine up?
Yeah. Well, because that stack of clothes I'll get to after work, and because that is actually your father's, and because right, and it becomes these excuses or because I'm the parent.
Yeah.
And that, again, it creates resentment. It doesn't build the relationship. I think it's counterproductive to say to somebody who's inquisitive and trying to figure out and understand a value system, it's totally counterproductive to just kind of poo-poo their them being inquisitive. It's totally counterproductive to come down on them for wanting to understand. Right? There's definitely a line they can cross where they're just being defiant. But I think a lot of times we don't take the time to understand our own values. Right? Mm-hmm. We just have these values that we haven't really thought about. We're pretty sure because they're ours, we feel like they're right. Mm-hmm. But I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with a parent and gone over what their values are, and they went, I mean, I've just been living that way my whole life. I don't know. I don't know why. Right. Have you ever experienced that in your own life or with one of your clients?
Yeah. I'm thinking about kind of myself, and it's something that growing up, I never really talked about. It was something that certain values were instilled onto me, and like those became my values. It wasn't really until I was a lot older where I really kind of had that thought about, oh yeah, you know, what are my own values? What do I really agree with? And what do I want to teach, you know, my future children? It's not a conversation that was brought up, you know, a lot, like not in school, not my parents didn't have a conversation with me about that. I kind of just figured it out on my own.
Yeah. And I don't think that, again, parents sometimes, no, I think most times, we just make assumptions that our values are right, they're obvious, and that your child's just going to understand it. And if they're bucking against your value system, that they are wrong and they are doing it out of defiance. They might be doing it because it's time to challenge that value system sometimes. And then there's school, okay? Just recently, we shut down all the schools, and whether anybody wants to admit it or not, we've got a whole lot of teachers who just kind of skated people by, didn't show up for their classes, or showed up and showed movies, right? There's all this stuff. And now we're living in a school system for many children where they're almost superficially expected to do work like we had to do work. But there are countless opportunities to make things up by the end of the year, right? So the value system that the parents have all grown up with, and I grew up with, is get your homework in on time. Do things in a diligent manner, and procrastination is bad. That's a value, okay? Not a moral. A lot of parents are like, no, that's a moral. No, that's not a moral. Moral is what's right and wrong. That's a value, right? I value getting things in on time. Well, the average student right now doesn't have to get their homework in. And when they don't, they get an opportunity to turn it in by the end of the semester or period of time, and then they get just as good a grade. And so I often ask parents, well, if I told you you can make just as much money as you're making, but you can do all your work the last week of the quarter, would you want to do all your work leading up to that and go to work every day for 8 hours a day? Or would you want to just get it done at the last minute and vacation and do all the things that you want to do instead of working while making the same amount of money? And that's like a poof for parents, right? It's a mind-blowing thing for me to say. And again, these are values things. We've got to talk to them about what's going on. I've coached a lot of parents through discussing with their children, hey, this is why I value not procrastinating. By the way, I understand that you can get the same grade whether you procrastinate or not. Here's what I think the consequences might be down the road. Okay. Yeah. Is there something we can come to? And the parents have been really shocked at what some of their kids have said during those conversations.
Yeah. I'm definitely one that leans more towards procrastination, and it's worked for me. There's been times where, in school I have to get a paper turned in and I have like a whole month to do it. And I don't want to do it for the first 3 weeks. I want to do it in a week. And I end up getting it done because it's due, but there is that anxiety where I wait till I only have a week left to do it, and I put it off for so long. And so it can, like you said, it can work.
Yeah.
It's just different for everyone.
It'll be interesting with your stepdaughter how you handle that, though, if you're ever put in a position to talk to her about that, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to say, hey, look, here's this value I have, procrastinate. There's a little bit of anxiety with it. However, let me tell you, the things I've experienced because I procrastinated were great, right? But you're not going to say that, right? What are you going to tell her?
I'm going to tell her to get it done. And I have a perfect example already because it's really funny. I just thought of this. Certain days I pick her up from school and I'm in charge of homework. So in my mind, as soon as we get home, I give her a snack and we go straight to homework. Of course, she doesn't want to do it, but I want to get it done. So it's not something I have to, deal with later on. Yeah. But I understand for her, she doesn't want to do it and she'd rather wait till later. But I don't want to procrastinate on that. I want to. Now, for me, as I've gotten older, I do like to get things done more on time. So that way, they're not hanging over my head. And I kind of feel like, oh, yeah, well, I used to procrastinate. And now I'm trying to, teach my stepdaughter, it's for me, I think it's better to get things done right away. So that way you can enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. But in practice, you've wanted to enjoy the week and then get the work done, right? And so, and I think a lot of parents want to pretend like they don't procrastinate instead of saying, hey, look, I procrastinate. Here's what I've suffered because of it. Here's what I've gained because of it. And I'm all about the honest conversation, especially when it comes to values. And I think that open, honest conversation, again, sets you up for more influence in your child's life. I think the best way to deal with the conflict that comes from your children not acting in a way that adheres to your values is through empathy. Okay? I think that putting yourself in your child's shoes, for example, things that are not important to you or seem silly that your teen is going through is literally everything to them. You're going through some things that they don't care about. They're going through some things that you remember don't really matter. Your value is, hey, this argument you have with this boyfriend doesn't really matter because they're not going to be in your life anyways. Or this thing that you're dealing with on your team doesn't really matter because, hey, down the road, you're not even going to remember it, right? So things become everything to them. Things are everything to them based on their little bit of time on this earth. And we have to have empathy and try to remember what it was like. And that's where sometimes the values are going to be different. And it's important, right? If they greatly value, for instance, a relationship, a romantic relationship with somebody, and you're going, this doesn't matter, you shouldn't be putting time, effort, and energy into that, you might be robbing them of a very important life lesson that has to do with relationship. And relationships are really important. Navigating and learning about relationships is so important. And they only do that by failing and by crying and by making that relationship everything. Now, I know we don't want to get it to get in the way of other friendships and in the way of school, but I think we can put ourselves back in their shoes, right? We can try to remember, what was it like that one time we had that relationship that now doesn't matter at all? How did that feel, right? And again, I think that empathy is the key to us coming to the conversation in a better way.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of times, as we get older, we just forget what it was like being that age and what things were really important to us. And then you get older and you become an adult and you maybe forget, or it's, it's not a big deal to you, but to your child, it's everything.
Yeah.
And so being able to empathize and try to put yourself back in your child's shoes and understand, what they're going through really would make just, I feel like a huge difference.
Yeah. And it might not make a difference in, again, what you want to teach and your overall response, but it might make a difference in the intensity or in the words you use to help them feel supported, right? So I think it's going to make a difference in some of the little things that actually become the big things. And that brings me to another thing. I think that parents don't realize sometimes when they're being hypocritical. I talked earlier about being hypocritical. That, definitely is not going to make you influential. And so it's kind of like when a parent says, don't yell at me. And why do kids yell at their parents? Because they're not getting their way. They're disappointed. They're frustrated. They don't feel heard. They don't feel that things are fair. And so it's kind of an interesting one, right? This specific value, I don't think anybody would argue with me and just say that, hey, we should be teaching our children that when they're disappointed, when they feel frustrated, they should remain calm. They should not yell at us. They should not put us down. They shouldn't throw temper tantrums, right? Yet the average parent, I think, responds with a really angry tone when they're disappointed in what their child did. They respond with yelling and that harshness when their child makes them feel unheard or disrespected, right? And so it's like, hey, you need to treat me this way, but when I'm disappointed, frustrated, feel like things are unfair, I'm going to act this way with yelling and anger because I'm the parent, but you need to do the opposite, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that in how we deal with those things, frustration, disappointment, and our reactions when we think things are not fair or somebody's doing the wrong thing. I think that one, the values kind of surrounding that topic is one of the most hypocritical pieces to parenting. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. And this has come up in parenting group a lot, is healthy modeling. If you're trying to teach your child not to yell at you or not to cuss at you, but yet they do something that pisses you off and then you're yelling and cussing at them, that's not going to help.
Yeah.
So modeling those healthy behaviors that you're wanting your child to do, as a parent, you should also be modeling them for them to see that you're doing.
And in front of them. Sometimes,
in front of them, yes.
The road rage thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's another one.
I was working with a family and it was the parents' responses at sports games was, kind of outrageous for the child, and the child's behavior. We actually figured out that child's behavior that the parent was having trouble with looked like the parents' behavior when they were frustrated at sports games. I cannot tell you how often this comes up. Teens will constantly bring up how angry their dads get at sporting events, football, baseball. And we're not talking little league and stuff, or high school baseball. We're talking pro, right? We're talking anger and yelling because their pro team didn't perform well. And this recently came up in a session that I had. And And again, it's that consistency in what you model. And when I help parents sometimes find a way to be, I guess, more poignant, more aware of, yeah, you're teaching and kind of modeling your values over here, but over here it's different. They're shocked a lot of times because it's not conscious. It's not like they wake up one day and go, okay, here's where my values count, and over here my values don't count. It's totally different, deal. But that consistency in what you model, that consistency in how you talk about it, that consistency in following through with the values you're teaching, even when it's really, really difficult for you, I think is the key to handling this more than nagging and punishing and yelling.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about how much I've heard, at the parenting group and with clients when teens or children see their parents getting the help that they need, it motivates them to want to do that for themselves.
Yes.
And no matter how much, the parents have tried to push for the teens to get that help and the resistance that came with that, once a parent started doing it and the teens saw their parents making that effort, it was completely changed, life-changing.
Yes. And we're talking about the value of getting help when you're struggling mentally or in relationships. And being willing to ask for help and then accept the help, right? Go along with the help. And it is interesting because parents will tell me all the time, my child will not get help. My child doesn't want to come in. And because you work here, our standard kind of response is, great. This is a great time for you to model getting help, get the help, accept the help, and improve your life regardless of what's going on with them. And then they're more likely to want to get that help because they've now seen it. And some parents are really good about it, and some parents are really resistant to that and just think that it's silly. But that value of getting help when it's difficult to get help, you can explain that to your child till you're blue in the face. But modeling it, and not just modeling it, showing that getting help works, that you can actually get happier by asking for help is huge. That lesson will plant a seed for a lifetime. Trying to tell them you need to go to therapy, then they go to therapy and they only share a little bit, if anything, and then therapy didn't work, and then they go again because they acted up again, and then they go again because they acted up again, right? A lot of parents do that. When my child's struggling, I'm going to force them into therapy. Things aren't that bad, so they don't really want to go, right? That teaches, hey, getting help's only of value when you're in crisis.
Yeah.
And it's not really going to help anyways. So I'm excited for people to challenge themselves. I hope that we challenge some parents to take a more poignant and deliberate look at their own values. I don't even think parents have write out your values, write all the values, the little ones, right? From I value, putting my toothbrush in a container because I don't think it should be sticking out in the bathroom, to the big ones like, working hard and don't procrastinating and going to college or whatever that might be. I think parents should make a list of all their values and challenge themselves. Where did this come from? Why did this come this way? How did I come to this value in my life? And then the big question is this a moral or is this a value?
No, I really had a fun time talking about, these topics because I want to write down my own values and kind of sit down and think through what's important to me, because that's something I haven't really done before. And I'm really interested to see what comes up for me. But I think this is a really important conversation that isn't talked about much, but yet is so a part of everyone's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being on today. I'm excited to do some more podcasts with you. It's fun to have that feedback, in terms of the concepts that we're teaching parents. And again, watching and hearing how this information has hit you over the past year and how you've used it in your practice, but then also in your own life with your new family has been I love those conversations. I love bouncing these ideas off you. So I appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great conversation.